to the afternoon session. This is day 2, the proposed Wairarapa District Plan hearings. Someone just close that door, please. Russell. A fairly busy morning and got through some 9 submitters, and we have another 5 or 6 scheduled for this afternoon. Starting with Mr. Byrne. I pronounce your name right? That is exactly right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Just while your materials being circulated, Mr. Byrne, I'm David McMahon. I'm the chair of the Independent.
Thank you.
I'm a Wellington-based planner and hearings commissioner, and I'm joined by a mixture of councillors and iwi representatives, all who are sitting as commissioners for the first session.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Right, that's a bit of a confronting slide there. I think I might have overdone it a bit, but anyway, councils are required to have a district plan, and it's required to be enabled for 30 years of housing growth. Today I'll try to convince you that the proposed district plan, as far as Marston is concerned, is not enabled for 30 years housing growth, and the required housing enabling is for 8,000 new houses over the next 30 years. So there is only about 30 hectares of rural land designated as future urban zone, which I shall call fuzz from now on, if that's all right, in the proposed plan. I reckon that's enough for about 300 standalone houses, maybe 600 townhouses, which is a fraction of 8,000, I guess, very small fraction. I am aware that within the proposed plan, there's a few smaller pieces of land that have been rezoned from rural to residential, but a significant amount. Therefore, when I saw the proposed plan, I thought it failed the sniff test. There's just not enough land being released for new houses, and it's obvious. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try to move on to the next slide.
It's one too.
There's a delayed reaction here, so I really can't see what. Okay, right. My apologies if this is not news to you all. I didn't know how much you know about the process of a proposed district plan. Was going to be
living and breathing it for the last 3 years.
Okay,
Byrne, so
right,
fairly au fait.
Good. Right. Well, in that case, I'll whiz through this slide. On the left, non-legal documents the council, Marston Council here I'm talking about, would have prepared, and on the right there's the legal requirements from the MPS UD, Urban Development. So from now on I'll call them the HBA and the FDS, if that's all right. And there's a timeline about what's happened to date. The problem I see here is that the HBA is based, I've been told by a staff member, is the HBA is based on a draft plan, not the proposed plan. And there are differences between the two. I cannot tell you why that happened, and I'm not even certain it did happen. So the HBA, and I'll go on to this later, has errors, and that advises the FDS, which has the same errors. And the FDS advises the district plan, which also has the same errors. And not shown on there because I just couldn't fit it on the slide is the fact there will be a finalised district plan at some point. Slide 3, please. So this is actually the slide that is why I'm here today. I don't normally show much interest in planning matters, but I do live in the Upper Plain area, which is a rural area. You can see on that slide, and this is taken from directly from the HBA document, that in my area, which is 100% rural, there are plans, or said to be plans, to have 2,256 new houses built. I was surprised at this, and I wondered if the property I live in, which is on the urban rural boundary, literally, I have urban houses next to me. I wondered if my house had been rezoned, which led me down the path to being here today. But what I found out was all 2,256 houses were planned for the Chamberlain Road fuzz, which is half a kilometre away from where I live. Now, I've got a friend who lives in Chamberlain Road, and he was rather surprised to find out that nearly 2,300 houses were going to be built behind his back fence. So I promised to look into that for him, even though I don't know much about planning. And another friend of mine lives in Lansdowne, could not believe that 1,563 houses were going to be built in Lansdowne East. So I've got questions about those figures, which I'll go into today. The significance of this is on the very bottom right, you can see there's about that's the figure of about 8,000 houses being required for the Marston district. And this diagram is basically saying 8,000 is achievable. So you do need all those figures to be right to come up with 8,000. Yeah, my friend thought he thought the golf course was going to be turned into houses, but I don't play golf, so I don't care. The next slide, please. Right, this is the Upper Plain area. It's a big area. Just to be clear here, most people know Upper Plain as being the houses, the residential houses in Upper Plain, but in actual fact, they are Wairarapa zone, which was on the previous page. Upper Plain, this is called an SA2 area, which is statistical area 2, which is what the HPA used when it's doing its analysis. Basically, it's a RD area, and they like to keep it that way. Luckily, it is just about showing the Chamberlain Road fuzz at the bottom there. There's a little area. Now, the changes, I forgot what slide I'm on here now. Okay. In the rural area, in the proposed district plan, currently it's about 4 hectares for minimum subdivision size, and it's moving to 40 hectares. Consequence of that is that there's going to be very little more subdivision in the rural area, in my opinion. Most of that area is already lifestyle blocks of less than 40 hectares. And in any event, 40 hectares is not a lifestyle block, it's a farm. And the special rural zone is deleted in the proposed plan. That's that important. Slide 5, we're done. Right, so this is the amateur nature of this, but I don't have work tools anymore. I've been retired quite a while. This is the Chamberlain Road fuzz marked, and on the above that you can see another area in red, marked in red, which is a subdivision which has been going on since 2018 for 197 houses. That's how many the list resource consent was for, 197 houses. You can see that the new fuzz is a little bit smaller than the existing subdivision for 197 houses. They're both roughly 20 hectares. So my rough calculation, I reckon, to build a house on a piece of bare land, you need about 1,000 square metres, and that is about right for that first 20 hectares. 200 houses, 20 hectares. The owners of that existing subdivision also own most of the land in the fuzz. So all 2,256 houses are going to fit in that fuzz, which is rather different from the 197 that have gone on in the first phase. So, having uncovered what I thought was a basic mistake, I submitted on the FDS. If you go to the next slide. So this is from the summary submissions to the hearings committee. I didn't appear at that hearings committee, I just wrote in. because it was held in Wellington. So I was just thought it was a very small chance of anybody listening to me anyway, so I just didn't go. This is the response here, and unfortunately it's far too small to see, but basically Marston, in response to me saying that there was a mistake, Marston Council replied that there was no mistake. 20 hectares was enough for 1,959 new terraced houses and 297 standalone houses. So my assessment of that was that they were doubling down on their mistake. So when I saw that, I asked the Residents Association to put a post that there was going to be 2,300 houses in that area opposite Solway Station. And they put it on social media, which caused a fair bit of excitement, you could say, from the people who live in that area, you know, that people were going to be living in rabbit hutches and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so that resulted in a call from council that please would we remove the post. It was clearly inaccurate and wrong. And I asked the Residents Association not to remove it because we had a letter, or effectively a letter from the council saying it was right. So, next one. Oh, this is a letter from the head of comms at Marston Council, who basically says that, that the HVA was based on the draft district plan and not the proposed district plan. That the draft district plan had a much bigger area of fuzz than the proposed. I won't go on to what he said about figures and stuff, because frankly, I think he's not a planner and he got it completely wrong. He tried to make out that it wasn't as big a mistake as it really is, in my opinion. I also took this issue up with the manager of the FDS project, Ms. Rotherham, and she told me it was out of the FDS scope to look at errors like that. This is before it was finalised. She suggested I take it up with Marston Council, and that's what I'm doing right now. So the next one. I haven't done much investigation on this one. It's 1,563. I was a bit exhausted from the first exercise. The Official Information Act is not all it's said to be. This is the Lansdowne SA2 area where 1,563 houses are going to go. To put that in perspective, there's only 1,158 there now. Every single house is going to be divided into two, and there's going to have to be some others built, maybe on the bigger sections. I don't know. I suspect, but don't know, that whatever method they use to assess the ability of an area for new housing doesn't take into account things like parks and sports fields. But I don't know for certain. I do know for certain 1,563 is ridiculous. So slide 9. So the job of the HBA at the end of the day is to advise the FDS whether or not there's sufficient housing capacity in a district plan. A little bit silent on whether or not it's supposed to be the current plan or post plan or whatever. But I have to assume, given where we are today, that we're talking about the proposed plan, which is going to be the next plan for Marston. So the conclusion there was that the demand there on the left-hand column, 7,245, is how many houses Marston needs. And the capacity, in other words, what the number that is possible to build under the plan, is nearly 8,000. So the conclusion from that is that the plan is fine and has enough capacity for new houses. That slide proves it. It's a done deal. So we can move on. So the district plan has been assessed and found to be fine. So what I basically said is that figure of 7,968 there at the bottom should be more like 4,000, maybe a bit more, but still well below the 7,245 that is required. And the last slide. Thanks. This is taken from the MPS UD, apart from the bit in red, which is by me. And it says there that on the left, apparently you're all familiar with this, and there's another bit on the right where it says if there is insufficient development capacity, you must immediately notify the Minister for the Environment. Now, I'm sure there are several submissions. I haven't read them all, but I couldn't help but notice there's a few other people who have submitted that there's insufficient capacity in the district plan. The difficulty I see with that is that normally you would have to ask for a relief of some sort, you know, but frankly, what is the relief available if you have that view? Because you can't start rezoning parts of Marston at this stage of things and start suggesting that. So what can a submitter by myself actually ask for? Because I actually do care about affordable housing. So that's all I could come up with. The council has said that's out of scope of the hearing committee. So everything I've just said could very well be a waste of time. Maybe I should have started with that at the beginning. The other thing that you can do if you feel that you can't do that is maybe every single other submission, you could look at it and see if it would increase the capacity for houses in Marston, that you would take a different view on it, given what I just said. I am aware of, and I did start that exercise, but Marston is generally surrounded by high producing land, and it's not easy to find rural land that could be used for residential use. Just check I've said everything. I've finished. That was within 10 minutes.
That's fine, Mr. Byrne. The first observation is I'm just not sure how this fits into this hearing topic, which is the looking at strategic directions and whole of plan type issues. Have you given any thought to that?
Yes, I did. And because when you choose a submission, you have to pigeonhole it. And I'm no expert, but I was required to do that.
Right.
I thought if I get it wrong, then a council staff member will put it in the right group. I'm here thinking that because this is to do with the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, that's why I'm here today.
Okay.
Because it is a national policy statement related issue.
Whether it fits in today or some other hearing streams, probably a moot point. The important point is what do we do with the issue? And in your original submission, what was this decision that you required the panel to make?
But I say I struggled with that because if you have that view, and I'm not the only one, Greater Wellington has the same view, for example, and I think they'll be potentially submitting on it. What do you ask for? They really didn't ask for anything. I've asked for that letter to go to the Environment, which is apparently a legal requirement. If you find your plan does not have sufficient capacity, but I have also been told that that's not in the scope of the hearings committee. So I suppose that's something you'll have to wrestle with. If such a letter was written, I think the minister would make sure that the plan was changed. But I'm not sure on that. He probably wasn't ever anticipating a council writing to him to admit that situation arises. And looking at the timeline, which is going back to the earlier slide, you can see that if you look at that the FDS went to submissions 2 days before the district plan. Now, the logical thing to me would have been to finalise the FDS and then start the proposed district land process. Because by doing it like this, you've got a fair chance of there being a problem. And that's why I think the minister probably said, given a process, get out of that situation. The other thing is, you know, if during a hearing you delete a big future urban zone, then the same situation can arise.
Yeah. Certainly the timing of the district plan in relation to other statutory imperatives is something we have that this panel has no direct control over. And what I can tell you is that panel's been working on this plan for some 3 years now, and the content of the plan reflects a number of previous documents, including perhaps previous FDSs or previous HBAs. Certainly, it's a reflection of I think you referenced the MUGS, the Master Urban and Growth Strategy.
Yes, very difficult for a layperson to get a copy of that, I can tell you. But it would enlighten me a lot, but I put it into the non-legal documents.
Question I have for you is, can you just explain to us the derivation of the 8,000 target?
Sorry, the which?
How the 8,000, how that's been derived?
Yeah, thank you. Well done. This goes back to a report which I understand was written by an organisation called the Property
Economics, yes.
Yep. As far as I can see, they're a one-man band based up in Auckland. Don't know why. And I think all their directors, you know, if you look them up, they don't seem to be a substantial outfit whatsoever. They have come up with a method and it's a theoretical method of assessing how many new houses can be built in an area. One of their inputs will be a district plan of some sort or version, and the other will be information given to them by the staff of the proposed changes to that. So in this particular case, the explanation for the error on Upper Plain that I was given was that they told Property Economics that the fuzz was going to be 60 hectares, but then they put only a 20 hectare one in the proposed plan.
Yes, I understand that. Sorry, I asked you the wrong question. What this is showing is the theoretical or total realisable capacity for the Masterton area.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the projected demand over the 30-year period for housing?
That's the column on the left.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if it's projected demand by SA2 area or not. I can't remember, but I haven't got the slide here anyway. But 7245 is the projected demand for new houses. So that is slightly less than the projected capacity. So that's the test.
Yes.
That the HBA is about, which is checking that you have got sufficient capacity. That's the test right there. One figure is lower than the other. But if the figure of 7968 is wrong for the reasons I've just given, then that gives a wrong advice to the FDS, which gives wrong advice to the district plan.
Yes. And you, by your calculation, do you think there's a deficit of 4,000?
Yeah.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that big for that to be a wrong conclusion.
Yes.
It's only got to be 2,000 for that to be a wrong conclusion or less.
And then that takes us back to the question I asked you originally, how is that addressed? That's the more difficult question, isn't it?
Well, the experts, you're involved in producing a new district plan that, if I'm right, and I think I am, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be here, it's not going to be worth a lot. One of the key things it was supposed to achieve is not going to be achieved. And this hits right at affordable housing. And I'm sure you're not politically unaware of what the government thinks and what it thinks about councils and the council's drip feeding development land. You surely must all be aware of that. I've just given you a bit of an example, potentially.
Hmm.
I don't want to say what I'm really thinking. Yeah, it's not polite, but I'm just giving you an example of how things can go wrong.
Certainly. What you need to understand though, is that the hearing panel's here to hear submissions on the district plan. They don't, there's no necessary ownership of the district plan. I mean, we can make changes to the district plan to give effect to any submissions received.
Yep.
We're not undertaking an inquiry as such.
Yep.
Our ability to make changes is limited to the scope created by submission.
Yep. So that you may not be able to ask
Yes.
for a letter to go to the minister. I accept that, but I hope for you can see the point of view of, you know, this surely is a problem that you can bring up. But if there's no relief for it, I'd say the process is broken. I don't know how it's broken. Just this.
What we do next, and just see in a moment whether there's any further question. What we'll do next is we'll hear from the authors of the Section 42A reports at the appropriate juncture, and they will respond to these submissions. They'll tell us whether they agree or disagree, whether you've got it wrong or whether you're spot on, and what the remedy might be, and whether that remedy is within scope or not.
The obvious remedy, and I didn't even think to suggest it because I know it's a non-starter, is to start again with the consultation, get the plans changed and bin all this and get it right.
I do note that the hearing stream 2 actually does encompass the future urban zone.
Yes, and
It's on the 26th of August.
rather oddly, and I do promise to be quicker next time I appear, because I managed to cross multiple topics, I am down to appear twice more in a similar vein, including on the bus.
Well, we'll have a right of reply around about the time that the hearing commences, and we'll be able to meld the two matters together. Just to see, yes, Brian.
I just, on slide 2, where you had all the individual areas of the proposed housing development, down the bottom, Wairarapa, sure whether that is a new area in the urban area, but Wairarapa is a rural area halfway to Riversdale, and I can't see 400 odd houses going in a subdivision out there. Can you explain where that area is?
I wish I could, but I only looked at the two blindingly obvious. But you have highlighted another mistake. One would have to look at the SA2 area and see, you know, what is it, Tanui maybe? Is it that sort of area? Yeah. So you may have found another mistake.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Byrne? Well, thank you, Mr. Byrne. We'll be the officer's responses, and it sounds like we'll hear from you back again around the 26th of August.
Yeah.
Do we have an electronic copy of your slides, Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
We do. Yes. Thank you.
So just.
Yeah. Thank you.
Planning meeting.
Good afternoon, Francis. Can you hear us? The message just came up. She was having trouble.
We should put the appendix in the statement, given the technical difficulties, it should be done.
Yes, we would. We're not going to hear from her today.
That's actually 17 difficulties. However, we have got Francis
Elizabeth. So she's actually going to speak a bit later, but we can move her up if you do.
So we'll hear from Ms McGrady. Yes. Good afternoon, Ms McGrady.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Good
Good
afternoon, panel.
welcome. I should disclose I've heard from Ms McGrady before in a different forum.
And with a different hat on, Commissioner.
Yes,
Need to be clear, I'm not here with my Fed's hat on.
okay,
Yeah.
good. You're here in a private capacity.
Yes, I am. Yep. Yep.
Right, do you have any?
No, I'll just speak to my submission if I may.
Yes,
Yes, so hi folks, Liz McGrady, I think I know some of you. Wairarapa local, I grew up on a hill country sheep farm north of Masterton, and I've been on a lifestyle block just out of Masterton for the last 30 odd years. So I have, I think, an appreciation of farming is indeed the powerhouse of the Wairarapa. And I also have an appreciation of the role and contribution that small blocks make to Wairarapa economy and community and society. So my submission is specifically, it's quite narrow. It's focused in particular on small blocks and rural subdivision. And so for Hearing Stream 1, it's just the strategic framework component and a couple of the objectives. So what I'm going to do is just very briefly, I'm sure everyone has got my submission and has glanced at my submission. I'm just going to highlight a couple of points and as I move through to the objectives that are under consideration here. So in my view, as it currently reads, the proposed CDP creates an unfortunate and I'm sure unintended inference that lifestyle block owners and their properties are not valued within Wairarapa society and economy. My alternate view is that the purpose and character and amenity values of the rural zone inescapably includes the peri-urban, because most of them are peri-urban in and around the townships, lifestyle blocks. In my view, the small holdings, the lifestyle blocks provide multiple ecosystem services. That's a concept that might be familiar to some of the panel across regulating and provisioning and cultural services. And it hasn't actually been analysed or established that the sum of those services yielded by the sum of lifestyle blocks across the Wairarapa is actually less than farmland. That assessment actually hasn't really been made, not really. And in my view, small holdings make a significant contribution to economic activity in the Wairarapa, and I've listed out various aspects of that. And hasn't been established that they are a net social cost, which is suggested in one of the supporting papers. Just a very tiny little brief example. I bought my block of land, it's about 5 hectares out Tuiori. 30 odd years ago, it was basically bare land when I bought it, so it was farmland obviously, and I've devoted the last 30 odd years to collecting seed, propagating, planting. My particular passion is native trees. So today we have more trees than grass. I'm not running stock because they're currently not a good mix with my young trees. They would bite their head off. But I do have a little resistance to the concept that all my work and contribution and effort over the last 30 years is, God damn, it should have stayed in farm from the get-go, you know what I mean? Because that's the kind of inference that's here. So when it comes to the objectives, absolutely, I have no difficulty or argument whatsoever with them giving a prominent value to primary production, absolutely. Alongside that, I think the objectives should also recognise small holdings as an integral and valued component of the rural zone. So the two particular objectives that I touched on relevant to this hearing, it was CCR 03, resilience to natural hazards, where I was suggesting that that one could be amended to provide for resilience to natural hazards in a way which anticipates and plans for community needs and significant events, e.g. food security. And that was really linking to some of the discussion in my submission about that peri-urban zone and food security as being a component of that. And I'm just acutely aware, folks, that one of these days, might not be in our lifetime, but it jolly well might be, we're going to have the big one. So I won't dwell on that one. Probably the more important one from my perspective is this next one, RE05 rural lifestyle, where I proposed some words trying to give effect to valuing the fact that we do indeed have, hundreds of lifestyle blocks and their owners who have invested considerably in the Wairarapa. So turning now to the summary of submissions, on the first, the officer recommends reject, and on the second, the officers are recommending accept in part, which I briefly found promising until I got to section 42, where it seems to actually be a reject, not a accept in part. So I'm now on the section 42 report, and just homing in on RE05. Forest and Bird actually submitted on this one as well. And I'm actually, I could see that the forest and bird relief could be an alternate to the relief that I've proposed. But the essence of the section 42, if we go through to the recommended amendments, on CCR 3, it's a reject. Don't add that bit about food security. I see that point has had some support from NZ, and they set out some actually not bad reasons. I'm not going to make a meal of this one. I'm just going to emphasise we're a one here, and so it is something to be mindful for about. And I'm not convinced actually by the officer's reasons for not considering it. Turning to RE05, except that I'm going to say, Commissioner, that the officers have recommended various amendments to 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So I'm going to just look across those because the effect of some of those other amendments to 1 and 2 and 3 is actually to be less black and white, actually. So the suggested changes to RE01 seem to be widening it a little bit and providing
the reference to land use activities.
Yeah, reference to land use activities. And certainly from my perspective, land use activities encompass everything that's going on in the rural zone, which is most definitely both large and smaller farms, larger and smaller lifestyle blocks, particularly around the townships, and plus all those other quarries and whatnots that go on in the rural zone. So that kind of opens the door for valuing, the spectrum, and I firmly believe that it's in the diversity. That's where our strength is. 02, there's some amendments being recommended there again, so it's not so black and white. so that the rural zone used predominantly for primary production, and that makes sense to me. That's a reasonable assessment of the current and future situation, and protected from inappropriate subdivision use and development, not necessarily a freeze frame that there shall never be anything change ever in this region ever again. Everything that is a farm should must always remain exactly as it looks today. So the change that's recommended is from inappropriate subdivision use and development, and I think that's referring back to the language that's used in the MPS HPL.
And also the RMA.
Okay. And similarly in REO3. So the relief that I was looking for on 4, probably bite my tongue on 5, does now actually, I'm willing to temper it in light of these changes that have been recommended to the other objectives. I would still, my preferred relief is still that there be an explicit recognition that the peri-urban lifestyle block sector of the rural zone is valued, is respected and valued, and does indeed make significant contributions across the environment, across the economy, and across social and cultural values. Failing that, if the panel are not of a mind to take that on board, then the wording of 5, I would take on board actually some of the suggestions that Forrest and Bird were making. I'd take out that only. Opportunities for rural lifestyle subdivision development are only provided. It just feels a little bit pejorative and overly definite, and it actually doesn't need to be. You could achieve the same result by taking that only word out and leaving it to read opportunities for subdivision development are provided. We just feel a little bit less critical. Are provided in parts of the rural environment. I don't understand this next bit that's been suggested by the officers, and associated uses located, designed and constructed in a manner. I don't actually know what that is intended to communicate. It's making it quite clunky. Objectives are always better if they're quite sharp and crisp and clear. So I don't understand what that bit is intended to achieve. I don't support adding it at this stage. And there's a question about adding reverse sensitivity for industry, etc. That's a question that was being left for the panel to cogitate on. And again, I probably don't support that either, because there's other protections, I think, elsewhere in the structure of the CDP. So my preference is the relief that I set out in the submission. My alternate on 05 would be a slightly edited version of this, similar to the one that Forrest and Bird have suggested, that opportunities for subdivision are provided in part where they don't conflict with that primary production objective. So that's me, Commissioner.
That's generated any questions? To my right, anyone? And in my left? No?
Can we just ask the officers just to clarify what they mean by that addition in 05?
Yes, sure.
That came about from memory from a submission from Frost Fans New Zealand. So they thought that it wasn't just rural lifestyle. It was, and the subdivision. It wasn't just subdivision layout. It's what also came subsequent to the subdivision. So how land was used and what buildings. So that was the location, design, and construction of land use activities and buildings. Better and more clearly expressed.
Yes, I certainly didn't take it. That wasn't my reading of what that was suggesting. So,
Sure, what it said to me then.
Okay.
Sorry.
okay. So I think Whitney, you'll have another look at look at the, yes. Focus, with the intention was focus on land use. Yeah, the, location design and construction of land use and, my only,
Being clear is always very good.
yes, my only question, it goes back to your, PCR 03 and the possibility of adding food security to that.
Yeah.
Does that take that objective in a different direction than how it was notified? And if so, would it be better to leave that objective act and look at achieving the food security matter through an alternative means? That objective looks about not increasing risk and consequences of natural hazards, and that's about how land use and subdivision develops and where it's located.
And I've just flicked to the rest of the objectives to see if there's a sensible place to take that point on board, Commissioner. But they're actually not quite, because could it hook in with one of the others? Not easily, actually.
Just remind me how you had suggested the RO3 could be altered to reference food security.
There was just an extra line so it would have read the Wairarapa develops and functions in a way that does not increase risk and consequences of natural hazards, and that would be things like not building on your fault lines and floodplains and things, and which anticipates and plans for community needs and significant events, e.g. food security. And I was mindful there, the context there is that, and I referenced some work from Lincoln, where the Combined District Plan almost wishes that we could turn the clock back and have a very hard edge between the towns and the farms. Here's the town, here's the farm, and there's nothing in between. And the reality is that the agricultural powerhouse in the Wairarapa is directed to the export economy in particular. And there is a body of work that's been coming out of Lincoln looking at that peri-urban zone and the multiple functions that can go on in that peri-urban zone where you've got a mix of, smaller blocks between town. It becomes a soft boundary between town and country. And in that zone, most commonly, I'm a lifestyle, my neighbours are lifestylers, and everyone here knows lifestylers, and the first thing they do is they all love to put a veggie garden in and put some orchard trees in and probably put some chooks in and plant natives. We all love to plant trees. So there's instantly. And quite a few of them are involved in the informal economy. So in that context of valuing the contribution of that urban lifestyle block sector in a big event, and especially, and I do make the point in here, especially in the context that in town we want to intensify, all the directions to intensify, and we can all think of grandma's house in town, she also used to have the big veggie garden and the orchard trees down the back, and now there's 4 apartments. So that's a long way, Commissioner, of responding to your question, which was really saying, is there another way? And perhaps further down the track, perhaps there's a policy that could be tweaked a little bit. But really my intent was to introduce that concept because I think it's sound planning for us to do. And just to be real about the contribution that peri-urban zone is likely to make in the event of a big event in the Wairarapa.
Okay, and it's particularly the peri-urban zone that might have a role in planning for community needs in a significant event.
I think so. And the reality is that most of the lifestyle blocks, that's where they are. That's where they cluster. Within 5 to 10 to 15 minutes max of around the townships.
Okay, well, we'll ponder that.
Yep.
Thank you for your presentation.
That's my pleasure. Thank you, folks.
Because, thank you.
The yeah. That's right. It's terrific.
I was waiting to be asked.
Welcome, Mr. Redford, and thanks for, well, we're almost on slightly over.
Minutes.
Not bad going. Had a busy morning. And we've had a little bit of a shuffle to the agenda this afternoon, so now we're in your hands. Do you have any written material in addition to your original submission?
No, it just work on the basis of the submission, which is 2 pages and a photocopy of a farm plan.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, commissioners. My plea generally is for light-handed regulation in the food producing remote rural area. I've deliberately put in the Greater Wellington aerial map because it shows that for us, the coastal strip and sea faces is our farm. But I do appreciate that the community has a greater interest in the coastal rural environment. But I comment that comes at the point of subdivision and closer settlement. And I take as an example the role proposed of no more than a 3-metre cut. Now, on a lot of sedimentary or clay type soils, that's pretty fair because a vertical cut in that type of soil will collapse. However, 80% of the station is greywacke soil type, where it means the country is steeper, therefore the cuts in a road need to be proportionately deeper, but once cut into the greywacke as a vertical cut, it won't move. So in our context, where to our north, we're not visible by neighbours, and from the south, only a few, the effect of such a rule might mean that we can't use the rather large hinterland, and clearly that won't have been the intentions of the authors of the plan, because the underlying rationale of such a rule is effects on neighbours, perhaps vigil, and if we're remote, then it's not the same considerations, but for us, a great concern about good quality roading to the interior of the station. We live in a world of carbon, and I've had to face the unintended consequence of carbon of rates possibly going up 4 or 5-fold. That has taken a lot of my effort, which means with this plan, my approach to it is light-handed. But my appreciation is to the South Wairarapa that where I was looking at rates up to 200,000, it seems that by excluding the carbon influence, we have common sense. But I'm not an anti-carbon person, except my route is different. I advocated for the AGS years ago, and on the 3rd time they got it. Using that scheme, we've planted 94 hectares of eucalypt forest, They're angiosperms, they flower, they're good for biodiversity, and incidentally, we now graze 2.9 stock units under that eucalypt. So what I'm saying is that a seemingly benign rule of a 3-metre cut in the coastal environment might make it very difficult for us to put in the right access for tree planting and selective extraction of high-value eucalypt timbers. I'll make one final point that where unusually we planted row by row 4 different varieties, my preferred variety, Globidea in autumn, that is a very high value furniture timber. Now, it's in no one's interest that we can't actually selectively remove elements of that as we go along. Pulling out of that to what I call overarching legal principles, this, of course, takes us into the whole area of John Locke. And I say that at the heart of John Locke's philosophy is this idea of consent of the governed and limited government. And I do refer to the Supreme Court decision in the RMA case, Waitakere and Estate Homes, because clearly the principles that I described in a 1998 LLM paper have been recognised in obiter dicta in that decision. And while the political atmosphere around us has changed so that the present administration is referring to property rights, I haven't seen any acknowledgement of that in the present plan. Maori landowners, of course, would get there by way of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, but in asserting property rights, I'm merely asserting the right to promote from neighbours who may be affected that we might use the land productively and imaginatively. And anything that I might do short of subdivision is very transitory. Whether I plant a shelter bout, build a hay shed, all of these can be wiped aside with a good 12-ton digger in a week. I also, at the foot of the first page, make a plea that law must be clear, simple and predictable. Now, I notice that the modern trend is not to have black and white rules, but degrees of permission. And that's all quite understandable to the planning practitioner familiar with the document. But I have to say that because of the pressure on us, we are with one permanent employee managing 8,000 stock units with a couple of pensioners, including my wife, which comment doesn't amuse her. But that's the reality economic-wise, and costs and rules will stop me adapting and changing, and these are times of great change. So what I'm saying is the law must be clear, simple and predictable, and a busy farmer looking at the plan isn't going to precisely see, is there a vegetation rule? Is there an earthwork rule? So perhaps some thought might be given to a one-page schedule, farmer specific, saying, farmers, look at this area. That would mean the law would be clear, simple and predictable. And if you've got an earthwork rule, then it would say no more than 3 metres, but at least everyone would know where they stand.
Mr. Rutherford, do you think that's a role for the council, or is that a role for, say, the representatives of the farming community, such as Federated Farmers?
I say it's a role for both. I say that the councils owe us a fiduciary duty, plain dealing and simple language. In making that comment, for many years, my neighbour to the south was Chris Barge. He had a very good agricultural degree, and I think it was 2-3 cycles of plan ago, maybe 20 or 30 years, I forget which. And he said, Dan, I tried very hard reading the district council plan, but every time I started to read it, I went to sleep. And he said, by Thursday, I gave up. Now, so I think plain dealing would suggest a one-pager could do a lot of good.
And presumably that would sit outside the district plan. It would be a document that would be available on a website, or that could be downloaded. Is it?
I see no harm in having it in what is published, but you might want to say something, council explanation not having legal effect.
It's important that such a document doesn't purport to be all-encompassing.
I'm making that suggestion conscious that in the real example I've cited of 3-metre vertical cuts, it is a fact that at the northern end of our property, approaching the Wairarapa with explosives, and for many years I had my ticket, and heavy machinery, we've got a road with a 7-metre cut, which means it's safer, but it is a 7-metre cut. So clearly, if an overzealous officer was to tackle me about a 3-metre cut, then they would have to consider my point of view that this would be, in our circumstance, and I emphasise that, in our circumstance, this would amount to a substantial deprivation of a property right.
Okay.
We, with neighbours, with a proposed earthworks rule, we were successful in this argument in the Environment Court because there was no pushback as to this case law, and eventually from either the regional council or the district council, and eventually got a letter from the court that they had closed their file. Naturally, I was interested in what that meant, so I spoke to a university contemporary who practices in this area, and his succinct words is, Dan, I think you've won that one. So it's not a bad thing to feel that your roles are subject to the common law. As Judge Jackson in one encounter in court said, these things should work together. But if they do work together, then the planners are obliged to seek the consent of the governed and no top-down government, and hence, as a suggestion, a one-page schedule of Mr. Farmer, what applies to you, could be a helpful step.
Let's see if there's any. Start on my left this time. Any questions to Mr. Rutherford? Nothing there.
No.
Obviously very clear.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
The, on my second page, and I acknowledge that some of my sentences are a little bit cryptic, given all the constraints of time. Now, on the next page, I thank the council for hearing a number of submissions and limiting the scope of SASMs, where originally the plan said the whole coastal strip was to be subjected to that regulatory control. So at this stage of the process, I'm obviously concerned that SAMs could potentially constrain our productivity as a farm being in the coastal area. But until the map data are working, I don't exactly know what I'm contending with.
No, and on the matter of SASM, they'll be subject to a different hearing stream.
Now, my apologies. I am growing slightly deaf, but I'm doing something about it.
Okay. The sites of an area of significance to Murray, the SASMs will
Yes.
be dealt with in a different hearing stream. Just looking at Hamish, what hearing stream is that?
That's Maori purpose. So. Oh, hearings 5.
Probably.
Five.
Yeah, which begins the 9th of December.
9th of December.
Yes.
So perhaps at this stage, while it's in a different hearing stream, my present comments could be transferred.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Comments will be heard, and it's appropriate, while talking of paragraph 1, to swiftly refer to paragraph 6. And all I would say is I presently have an application from my Maori neighbours, as is the right of any citizen, for a better quality of access, to which, after deep consideration, I've said, let's not do things by half. Let's have a 70-metre coastal corridor. Let's coastal values and recreational values be uppermost. Let's that be a private property right shared in common with my Maori neighbours. So that's reacting in a generous way. But now we're 18 months down the track and I haven't had a constructive answer. But the confidentiality was that one proceeds with a degree of sensitivity as to the needs of neighbours. So
that's where you need to say that, I think.
Yeah, okay. But all I would say there is, faced with an issue, because we know that there was the East Coast Road from way back before ever they cut the road into the Rimutaka Hill. It's important that we respond generously in the modern age of the motor vehicle. Now, the point 2 about the possibly inappropriateness of a 3-metre cut in the coastal environment area. Now, point 3, the OTRA rule. I seem to notice that every 10 years we're called to comment, and it seems as if the fresh generation of planners have read none of the submissions from 10 years ago. I recall that my neighbour, Mr. Graham Holmes, had particularly objected to the then rule and said, where is the science? And there was no ecological science to back up the proposition. And I suspect that the same will remain true. So I think in every sense, if the making of the Otarai River as significant were to be removed, I don't think it would do violence to the plan.
Again, Mr. Rutherford, that will be a subject of a different hearing stream. So we're happy to make a note and transfer that comment across to that to say.
That's quite the right thing. Do we have any knowledge when that might come up?
That's in the coastal environment. Is it in the coastal environment?
Yes.
Yeah, which is,
Bear with us a minute.
Hearing stream.
Hearing stream will be hearing stream 6 in
it's December, yeah.
late December,
So the week of Chris, 16th
Late.
December.
16th.
Now, clearly I could spend my whole life submitting,
Yes.
and clearly I have problems that are more pressing. And
My solution is that we have the hearings administrator make a note of these matters and cross-reference them to the appropriate hearing stream. And she will then make us aware of those matters at the time that the hearing stream comes up. But that's
now that would absolutely handle the situation. I do have a lot of detailed knowledge, historical and geological, as to coastal processes.
yes.
And I know I end up as an oddball of 7 miles of coastal land which hasn't been subdivided. And clearly with the previous legal career, I do know how subdivisions work. Now, as this process goes on, just by not subdividing, one does become more and more the focus of public attention. And somewhere at some time, a plan is going to have to recognise the value for everyone for those options to be kept open. And equally, it might appear when I say in respect of Maori special purpose zones, my paragraph 5,
Yes.
that might appear difficult, but I do know quite closely where tsunamis are likely to land. And in my student days, I would help repair fencing, and that's actually a great way to get familiar with your country. And at the southern end of what is now our deer farm, I was absolutely mystified that you'd be digging through rounding pebbles for 12 inches, and then 12, 18 inches down, you'd see chocolate brown soil. And I remember when I struck this, it was very odd, but it is a reality combined with increasingly severe cyclonic cyclones, and having Maori purpose zones in the coastal environment with a complete carve out of jurisdiction, I think is potentially leading the community into unnecessary cost. And we have to remember that it was for very good reason that the Maori themselves moved away from the coast. In fact, a Dr. McFadgen, who did his doctoral studies at Tāwhite, when he teamed up with a Dr. Goff from GNS, suddenly discovered that the mystery of why Maori settlements around the coast had disappeared was answered by the fact of tsunami. So it makes me nervous, is what I would say.
Again,
Enough said.
Again, Mr. Rutherford,
Another stream.
hearing stream 4, beginning the 21st of October. Ruth that's going to your point number 4. And we'll again transcribe that across to that hearing.
No, that would be good. Then by way of concluding, if I may, 10 years ago, I believe it was 404 submissions made about constraints on vegetation. And the point I would make is that what the farmer calls scrub, the nursery or transitional species, in my experience, we've never had any problems in growing those species. So why have a rule about them? I would contrast that with climax species, whether it's Remu or Karaka, and in between there, it's a matter of a landowner choice as to whether he or she wants to embark upon total afforestation by way of encouraging the transitional species to grow.
So again,
Yes,
another one.
another stream.
Yes, so that will be in hearing stream 6, which is the 16th December onwards. Again, we'll get that cross reference.
And the
I'll
deputy chair will be chairing that one, so.
Oh, excellent. So may I suggest that I will call Mr. Gorman, and if I can liaise with him, he strikes me as a fellow who always has his finger on the pulse. He's contracted to the South Wairarapa. Well, thank you.
Thank you. We've got those references, I believe, so that's good. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance. And
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.
St. was back to both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, that concludes the presentations of submitters. I will take a brief adjournment and come back in 5 to 10 minutes.